Alright. So up till now, we had read about how the last class we read that Gramsci elaborates upon the definition of intellectuals. The line that you can see in front of you, that is, all men are intellectuals. One could therefore say, but not all men have the function of intellectuals. And thus, because it can happen that everyone at some time, you see, everyone at some time, it's a very simple example that he gives, that everyone, anyone at a time can maybe fry some meat or cooks eggs or sews up a suit, or does some tailoring activities, but that does not make him a tailor by profession, or that does not make her a cook by profession. So what Gramsci here tries to prove or point out very specifically is that all men may be intellectuals. So when we are talking about intellectuals, we may just refer to anyone. However, it is not that everyone is an intellectual by function. That is, everyone may not function according to the idea of intellectuals that Gramsci says, that someone who is an intellectual, someone who is an traditional intellectual, must be converted or must change into an organic intellectual. That is, someone who extends and propagates his intellect in order to forward or facilitate the social movement, or in order to bring into equal terms the group that he represents, the working class that he represents. This is entirely from the perspective of the Revolutionary Party of Lenin that Gramsci talks about, that all men may be intellectuals, but there are only few by function, there are only few functional intellectuals, that is, who perform they perform their intellect in praxis. Praxis means in present, that is, for Gramsci, his own contemporary time, in praxis, whatever is happening now, the philosophy of the praxis, that in our special lecture, Professor Dipankar Chakraborty was also talking about. He said that Gramsci talks about the philosophy of praxis. So that actually meant that he was talking about the philosophy that was current during his contemporary time. So if I am talking about the praxis now, so I am talking about my contemporary time, or the philosophy that is practiced in present. That is what is meant by the word praxis in Marxist terms. So when Gramsci was writing this essay, of course, the book of the prison notebooks, we know that it was the Revolutionary Party of Lenin that was trying to make its prominence. And here we have Gramsci, a philosopher, a revolutionary philosopher, a revolutionary Marxist, or a vulgar Marxist as he was termed at that point of time, because he was talking about philosophy at praxis. So he was observing what was happening in front of him, and he was giving certain opinions about the praxis that he was participating in. And of course, this was from the perspective of the Revolutionary Party, that a revolutionary party must absorb in itself the traditional intellectuals and turn them into organic intellectuals, so that they remain affiliated to the group in which they were born, or to which they belonged at the first place, and they extend and elaborate the functions of that group, the progress of that group, and they represent the desires, the progress, and the sentiments of that group. The group being primarily the group of the working class, the group of the proletariat, that the Communist Revolutionary Party of Lenin was actually representing, the group that was revolutionizing against, or rebelling against, the class of capitalists, the class of feudal lords, the class of aristocrats, the class of estate owners, land owners, the class of ecclesiastics, or very generally speaking, the class of elites that they were revolutionizing against or rebelling against. So next what he says is that in the following stanza he says that there is a line over here. He says that this means that although one can speak of intellectuals, one cannot speak of non-intellectuals because non-intellectuals do not exist. So as he said that everyone is an intellectual, and if you see the lines that I have underlined, he says that each man outside his professional activity, or just anyone who we say that is not an intellectual by function. If any man can be an artist, he can carry out intellectual activity, he can be a philosopher, he can be an artist, he can be a man of taste, he participates, he has a particular world view, he has his own philosophy of the world, and he participates in that particular conception of the world and has a conscious line of moral conduct, and therefore contributes to sustain a conception of the world or to modify it, that is to bring into being new modes of thought. That is already the definition of an intellectual. So the line just before that, he says there is no human activity. You see this line, there is no human activity from which every form of intellectual participation can be excluded. So all human activities includes intellectual participation, because each man or every man, even outside of a professional activity, carries on some intellectual activity. That is, he can be a philosopher, an artist, he has his own worldview, he participates in that worldview, he propagates that worldview, promotes that worldview, he tries to change the world according to his own principles. An artist writing a poem according to his own perspectives, a philosopher writing about his own principles that could change the world. So all these are intellectual activities, but at the same time these are also not intellectuals by function. So he says that the problem of creating a new stratum of intellectuals, that is, if we want to categorize intellectuals by function, there is a problem, and that consists therefore in the critical elaboration of the intellectual activity that exists in everyone at a certain degree of development, modifying its relationship with the muscular nervous effort towards a new equilibrium, and ensuring that the muscular nervous effort itself, insofar as it is an element of general practical activity which is perpetually innovating the physical and social world, becomes the foundation of a new and integral conception of the world. So this is the definition that he gives for intellectuals by function. What he says is that uh, the intellectual activity which exists in everyone at a certain degree of development, he says that it should be modified with its relationship with the muscular nervous effort. That is, the intellectual, all intellectuals, he's talking about any intellectual in the circle of people who are all intellectuals. এটা এই প্যারাগ্রাফটার আগেই যেটা বলছিল, that all men may be said may be said to be intellectuals. So all these men, they are within them there exists an elaboration of intellectual activity, but it needs to be modified so that it changes into a muscular nervous effort, that is physical and mental effort. So this man who is already an intellectual, as Gramsci says all men may be intellectual, so this man who is already an intellectual must extend his activity, must extend his philosophy, must extend his own view of the world into a physical and mental activity, whereby, because of which the world may become newer, or may change, or may have its foundation in that mental and physical intellectual activity that that person undertakes. Basically what he wants to say is that if everyone is an intellectual, a functionary intellectual or an intellectual by function will be that person who practices in his intellect, who practices physically, who practices mentally in accordance with his intellectual principles, the intellect that already exists within this man must extend that intellect into a physical and mental effort, so that the world about which he is philosophizing, the world about which he is writing a poem upon, that world may change according to that philosophy, that world may change according to the principle of that of the poem that he has composed. So the dream must be realized. The world view that this intellectual has must be realized, must become real, and it will become real only when that person participates in that intellectual activity practically, in praxis, that is in everyday present contemporary world. Only then will that intellectual transform himself into an intellectual by function. Then he says that the traditional and vulgarized type of intellectual is given by the man of letters, the philosopher, the artist. So these are the traditional and vulgarized type of intellectuals. He says, therefore, journalists who claim to be men of letters, philosophers, artists, also regard themselves as the true intellectuals. In the modern world, he says, technical education, closely bound to industrial labor, even at the most primitive and unqualified level, must form the basis of the new type of intellectual. So, he says that in praxis or in the contemporary world, in the modern world, any man who has developed his intellect through technical education, it has to be bound, that education has to be practiced, it has to be applied theory যেটাকে আমরা বলি, theory we learn theories, and only when we apply it is the preaching of what we have learned. We একটা proverb আছে, there is a proverb called that we should preach what we teach. So it means that whatever we have learned, we should practice it as a principle of life. That is called preaching, when I practice my own principles in the practical life, in the very everyday life of the world. So Gramsci says that in the modern world, technical education should be closely bound to industrial labor, so that the technical education that this intellectual has gathered may be transformed into praxis, and that the class that he represents, that is the farming, that the class of the farmers, the class of the workers, the class of the labor, particularly the industrial labor, that can develop itself, even if it is in the most primitive and unqualified condition. And this should be the basis of the new type of intellectual. That is, a new type of intellectual must utilize the technical education that he has already gotten, must utilize that education in order to change or in order to progress the class of the industrial labor, as opposed to the capitalist principles, as opposed to the the principles of the base, the principles of the owners of production. This new type of intellectual must be a mixture, must be a hybrid of the technical education that he gets from schools and colleges created by the capitalist owners of production. Yes, all big schools, all big colleges, any even smaller colleges or educational institutions, they get patronized, they get patronages from private institutions. There are donations, there are charity work that many people practice in. So even this new type of intellectual must use the technical education that he has gathered from institutes made or helped by the very capitalists, and then use that education in order to progress his own class. He must get involved organically with the class of the industrial labor, so that that class may progress even from the most primitive and unqualified level. And this should be the basis of the new type of intellectual. Up till now, is it clear? Does anyone have any question? খালি এইটুকু অবধি? Okay. So this thing that you see, this name that you see here, Ordi Nuovo. The Ordi Nuovo, as you can see, it is written in the notes over here. It was a magazine that was edited. It was a magazine that was edited by Gramsci during his days as a militant when he was living in Turin. So it was a weekly review of the socialist culture in the early 20th century. This Ordi Nuovo was it was a review of the socialist culture of the early 20th century, 1919 ওই সময়টা 1919 to 1920. That is also the early modern age. এই সময় ইউরোপে T.S. Eliot is composing one of his finest works and publishing criticisms after criticism. So it was the early and high modern era. High modern era it was, and at that point of time he was writing a magazine. And whatever he was writing, that was, see, I have written it down in the left hand side. He says that because of what he was writing in this magazine of Ordi Nuovo, it was viewed by Lenin as in proximity to the political ideas of the Bolsheviks. Bolsheviks means the Russians. So Lenin found Gramsci's ideas in the magazine of Ordi Nuovo very much close, very much aligned to his own ideas of the Bolsheviks, of the Russian Revolution, and therefore Gramsci was noticed by Lenin. And then Gramsci writes, thus there are historically formed specialized categories for the exercise of intellectual function. Yes, true. So এতটা অবধি যে আমি বললাম যে the new type of intellectuals, the basis must be when there is a merging of technical education and of the activities of the industrial labor class. So of course now you must think a bit critically and politically over here. So if this is the new type of intellectual, then there must be a fight, there must exist a race to gather or to contain these intellectuals. So in this case it is the Revolutionary Party of Lenin who is using or utilizing these traditional intellectuals, these new type of intellectuals, in order to progress his own ideas. So in the later period, the capitalists themselves can use these hybridized intellectuals in order to propagate their own ideas. So he says that there are historically formed specialized categories for the exercise of intellectual function. This is the ideology. This is the ideology. This is how any particular political party, be it the Leninist Revolutionary Party, be it the Communist Party of India over here, in very contextually speaking, which was the Marxist wing or the Leninist wing. It can also be a secular party. It can also be a party based in interested in propagating certain religious views. Any party, it can be any ruling party, the power can be of any form. So there has to be a history. If we try to record, or if we go back, or if we try to read archives, or if we try to research, we will see that history has it that every time these new class of intellectuals has been used accordingly to the principles of power. So he writes, therefore, so this is the ideology, right? If power uses certain elements existing in the society in order to falsify the consciousness of the larger population, then these are the intellectuals that they use, the new type of intellectuals. So for Gramsci, this is a positive thing, as his own ideas, supported by the Bolsheviks or supported by the Revolutionary Party of Lenin, the new type of intellectuals, they were used to progress the ideas of Marxism or communism. So for Gramsci, this was a positive thing, and he says that they are formed in connection with social groups, with all social groups, but especially in connection with the more important, and they undergo more extensive and complex elaboration in connection with the dominant social group. So if the dominant social group is a capitalist political party, then the capitalist political party, or the capitalists rather, they will use this new type of functionary intellectuals in order to propagate their own capitalistic principles. So here we have today's praxis I'm talking about. So we have huge corporate companies using the intellectuals of artists, actors and singers, and the professional artists who are people who are professional artists, in order to propagate or in order to promote their own products, their own services. And we have seen in the recent times how these artists, how Bollywood actors got into trouble for promoting very bad quality products or inferior quality products, which affected or which clinically affected many people who consumed them. Recently it has happened. Even Amitabh Bachchan was not spared because of this. So you see that any type of any party or any form of power that exists at any given point of time, or any dominant social group that exists in any given point of time, it will use this new category of intellectuals bound up in the technical education. Technical education to সব artistরাই পেয়েছে. All intellectuals undergo technical education. I, practicing the profession of teaching, I have undergone certain kinds of technical education that has brought me into this place so that I can teach you all. So if I belong to a particular political party, then my lessons within the class will obviously not be free from the ideals of my political party. That is how it goes. That is how it goes. The political parties or any dominant social group, it includes me within the ideology, and I am one of the ideological forces. I become a hand, a working hand of the dominant social group. Therefore, Gramsci says that one of the most important characteristics of any group that is developing towards dominance is its struggle to assimilate and conquer ideologically the traditional intellectuals. But this assimilation and conquest is made quicker and more efficacious, that is more effective, the more the group in question succeeds in simultaneously elaborating its own organic intellectuals. So if I am working for any dominant social group as a teacher, my function is to give lessons to young minds, to students like you all. And if I am propagating a certain principle, a certain ideology owned by this dominant social group, then of course I am helping the dominant social group by assimilating, by conquering your minds as well, by bringing you into my social group, by organically being bound with you, becoming an organic intellectual of your class, and then assimilating you or including you within my social group. That is how any dominant social group stays in power, it remains in power. That is by extending its boundaries, by including more and more minds, more and more bodies that can work, more and more minds that can think like and in accordance to its to the dominant social group. That is how any dominant social group, be it a capitalist group, be it a capitalist government, be it a communist government, be it a secularist government, a federal government, all of these kinds of power, be it patriarchy, be it matriarchy, if you want to give both instances, all of these things, all of these forms of power, they perpetrate, they continue to exist in power by including more and more people into thinking similarly, into the same ideological praxis. Up till now, is it clear? কারো সমস্যা হলে প্লিজ বলো, আমি রিপিট করব. Okay, so now we come to how is this ideology practiced, how when Gramsci says that it is its struggle to assimilate and conquer ideologically. How do they do that? He says that the enormous development of activity and organization of education in the broad sense in the societies that emerged from the medieval world is an index of the importance assumed in the modern world by intellectual functions and categories. So he is saying that as education, as the organization of education developed enormously, education became an institution, from a privilege to an institution. In the early years, only the privileged ones could get education, right? But now it has become institutionalized. It is there for everyone who can access it, and now it is there for everyone altogether. So it is not a question of accessing it, it is already there. People have people can gain minimum education if they want to. So this has been institutionalized, and it is a daily part and parcel of our life. The institution of education, schools, colleges, so many schemes of the government to give education to the poorer sections of the society, so many charitable organizations facilitating education, making education free for children up to a certain age, etc., etc. So as this institution grew in size or became enormous in size, he says that uh, the importance of the functionary intellectuals also became more. Parallel with the attempt to deepen and to broaden the intellectuality of each individual, there has also been an attempt to multiply and narrow the various specializations. Narrow the various specializations, as in, if I am a teacher, then of course I am practicing in the social groups as a functionary intellectual. That is, I am an intellectual by profession. But as I grow, as I attempt to deepen and broaden my function, I also become narrow in the sense that I also become more and more specialized. I become specialized in a particular age of English literature, so that I am known for that, so that my identity depends upon my specialization. This can be seen, Gramsci writes, from educational institution at all levels up to and including the organism that exists to promote so-called high culture in all fields of science and technology. So as you grow up the ladder of education, as you reach higher and higher classes, you see that your knowledge also becomes specialized. It becomes specialized and it becomes very much diluted. Just one moment, I'll be back. Yes. So as I was saying, that as you move up the ladders of education, as you go into higher and higher classes, you see that your knowledge also becomes much more specialized. There are subjects within subjects, or topics within subjects, that you learn more and more about, and you become a highly specialized form of intellectual, specialized category of intellectuals. Okay, so he gives an example. He gives an example from this point. He says that a point of comparison can be found in the sphere of industrial technology. The industrialization of a country can be measured by how well equipped it is in the production of machines, with which to produce machines, and in the manufacture of ever more accurate instruments for making both machines and further instruments for making machines, etc. So constantly specialization ta বাড়ছে. The country which is best equipped in the construction of instruments for experimental scientific laboratories and in the construction of instruments with which to test the first instruments can be regarded as the most complex in the technical industrial field, with the highest level of civilization, etc. The same applies to the preparation of intellectuals and to the schools dedicated to this preparation. Schools and institutes of high cultures can be assimilated to each other. In this field also, quantity cannot be separated from quality. To the most refined technical cultural specialization, there cannot but correspond the maximum possible diffusion of primary education and maximum care taken to expand the middle grades numerically as possible. So what he says is that if there is a country or if there is a society in which there is high technical education, that is, there are industries that are making machines, and there are industries that are making machines to test the other machines. So it is evident from this kind of a society that it is very much technically qualified, and at the same time this qualification cannot exist, this high technical qualification cannot exist without quantity. He says quantity cannot be separated from quality, that is, there must be huge quantities along with this along with this technological superiority. There must be huge quantities of people who are enrolling themselves or who are attempting to gather this technical education so that they can attempt to rise up to that specialized class. But of course, as we know, that everyone cannot be specialized at any high technical activity. So the rest, of course, becomes the supporting elements of that group, people who are invested into the labor, into the industrial labor. So each and everyone cannot be a scientist, each and everyone cannot be an engineer. So it becomes the job of the scientist, the high intellectual, the professional intellectual, it becomes the job of the engineer, the professional intellectual, to step back and to teach what he has learned to his own social group, so that the group can expand and elaborate itself as well. This is basically the idea that he gives. So we will move on again. He says that the relationship between the intellectuals and the world of production is not as direct as it is with the fundamental social groups. Yes. So he says the relationship between the intellectuals and the world of production is not direct as it is with the fundamental social groups, but it is in varying degrees mediated by the whole fabric of the society and the complex of superstructures of which the intellectuals are precisely the functionaries. So he says, as I said, that the engineer, the specialized engineer, the specialized scientist, he is a product of the superstructure. Yes, he does not own the means of production, so he does not belong to the base in Marxist terms. He belongs to the culture of the society. Yet, so as not yet, and so I want to say, hence, his function as an intellectual is also a source, or is also is also from the source of that superstructure. So he belongs to a particular culture. This specialized intellectual of an engineer, of a scientist, etc., he belongs to a particular culture. He has his own world views, he has his own principles in life. The Revolutionary Party, or Gramsci says that any dominant social group will assimilate this high intellectual, will include its high intellectual, and this intellectual will become a functionary intellectual only when he or she helps, or he or she gets enmeshed or gets involved with the social group which he represents, from which he was born, from which he had risen up, and helps in the progress or helps in the expansion of his own social group. Now, any dominant social group will assimilate these intellectuals. So in Gramsci's case, if it is the Bolshevik Revolutionary Party or the Communist Revolutionary Party, then it will assimilate these intellectuals and it will mediate these intellectuals, it will direct these intellectuals so that they can go back, so that they can step back a class, so that they can step back to that primitive and to that undeveloped social class and help them in the progress. He says that it should be possible both to measure the organic quality, of the various intellectual strata and their degree of connection with a fundamental social group, and to establish a gradation of their functions and of the superstructures from the bottom to top, from the structural to the base upwards. So he says that it should be possible both to measure the organic quality of the various intellectual strata, that is, how good are these intellectuals by function, and it should be possible also to measure their degree of connection with a fundamental social group, that how well are they connected or how well do they belong to their own social group. And then there needs to be a gradation of their functions and of the superstructures. There needs to be a categorization of their functions. This is where the specialization comes in. So if you are a high intellectual, then your particular activity should be graded into a category, so that that category can be expanded in connection to the social group that you belong. So if I am if a scientist is if an engineer is specializing in making bridges, okay, or in the understanding of how mortar works, or how cement and bricks and concrete works, if that engineer is specialized in that knowledge, then it should be possible, then the revolutionary party must categorize his specialty, so that he can teach or he can promote his own learning as a specialized activity of the social group that he belongs. That is what he is saying, that this specialization must be taught and these specializations must be distributed among the social group or within the social group to which he belongs. আপাতত এটা বোঝা গেছে? Is there any issue up till here? Then please ask me. Okay. So Gramsci then says that what we can do, what we can do to divide this gap, that is, any specialized scientist or engineer will not want to step back a class, because ওর তো class movement হয়েছে না, class mobility হয়েছে, even if he has been an agricultural belonging to the agricultural population or to the farming population, if he has received technical education and the capitalist government and any feudal government or capitalist power has taken his intellectual education in order to work for himself, for the capitalist party itself, then there is a gap that exists between this intellectual and the social group to which he originally belonged. So Gramsci provides a method to bridge this gap, to bring closer these two groups that he says commonly called the civil society and the private, or the political society or the state. Political society is the political party that rules, the political elites or those political intellectuals, and the state is basically the people, the working class, or the state also here means the revolutionary party. Okay. So these two levels, he says, correspond on the one hand to the function of hegemony, which the dominant group exercises throughout society, and on the other hand to that of direct domination or command exercised through the state and juridical government. Of course, if there is a political party, then it will have hegemony, it will have power over power as a dominant group, and it will exercise its power through the state. That is the mechanisms that this central political party has established among the civilization, among the population of the country, among the population of that society, and it uses various discourses of law, which Gramsci here states juridical government, discourses of religion, discourses of gender, etc., etc. এগুলো সব modern এরাতে we can add these discourses, we can add because we are familiar with these forms. So if there is a political party at the central level, there is a group of elites, it has the function, on one hand it has the function of hegemony, and on the other hand it has a direct domination or it has a command that is exercised through the state and juridical government. The functions in question are precisely organizational and connective. The intellectuals are the dominant group's deputies, exercising the subaltern functions of social hegemony and political government. So he says that the function that he has been talking about so long. So in a society where there is a political group, and the political group has hegemony and perpetrates or continues its power through the state through various discourses, then the intellectuals of the political group, the intellectuals of the dominant social group, they become the deputies. Deputies kara hoy? Deputies are those people who are responsible for carrying out or implementing a law. The police, the cops, they are deputies. So in this case, Gramsci says that the intellectuals become then the deputies of the political society who are working through the state, and they exercise the subaltern functions of social hegemony and political government. This is what the intellectuals by function are to intellectuals. Are to Gramsci. Gramsci's new type of intellectuals are the deputies of the political society. For him, it is the Revolutionary Party of Lenin, and they work through the state and juridical government. That is, these intellectuals, they are the leaders of various of the various working class groups that exist in the superstructure, and these intellectuals then participate in various juridical functions. They represent certain sentiments of the working class. This is Gramsci's philosophy of praxis. Always remember this. He is talking about his own philosophy of praxis in relation to the Leninist government. So in today's world, you can connect it to, of course, the various there are so many lawyers and judges who support a particular political view and do not support the others. Similarly, there are other judges and lawyers that support another political view that may favor the working classes and not the capitalist class. So Gramsci says that the intellectuals of the new type therefore become the deputies of the political society that work in the state by getting assimilated or by getting absorbed or involved with the working class people, with the industrial class of labor. Okay, is it clear up till now? Anyone has any question? Please ask. Okay, then I will move on. So he gives two examples. He says that someone is trying to join now. Who is trying to join now? Rima Sultana, are you here? Rima Sultana. Rima Sultana, I can see you here in the class. Where are you? Okay. So he gives two examples. A new type of intellectuals are functioning. He says that these comprise, he says the deputies, they comprise, or the functions of the deputies, they comprise the spontaneous consent given by the greater masses of the population to the general direction imposed on social life by the dominant fundamental group. This consent is historically caused by the prestige and consequent confidence which the dominant group enjoys because of its position and function in the world of function. So, of course, at the first step, there is the consent that we give to various capitalist forces. Of course, the capitalist forces, they are the elite group, and we have initially certain, they enjoy certain a respectable position in the society. They enjoy the privilege of confidence that the masses have upon them. And of course, the This consent, he says, it is historically caused by the prestige with which the dominant groups enjoy because of its because of its position in the world of production. I don't think this is very difficult to understand that of course we respect Tata, we respect the owners of Reliance. They command respect for us from us. They have a certain standing in the society. They have a certain class standing in the society, and they enjoy the privilege of confidence and prestige. Then he says the apparatus of state coercive power, which legally enforces discipline on those groups who do not consent, either actively or passively. So there are people who give consent to this capitalist form of government, which is a dominant group, and there are people who do not give consent. This apparatus is, however, constituted for the whole of the society in anticipation of moments of crisis of command and direction when spontaneous consent has failed. So, in a capitalistic society, there are people who give consent to the political class because of the privilege of respect and confidence that they have had throughout generations. But there are also people who do not give consent, who do not want to live according to the ideology of this dominant political class, and upon them there is a coercive state coercive power. So the state now cannot the state no longer can ideologically contain this group who does not consent, and now it has to resort to coercive power, to forceful power, in order to dominate this group. And this group in turn, they lacks a leader. It says that this group is in anticipation of moments of crisis of command. So there is a crisis of command, there is a crisis of direction, and this group looks for a particular lead, looks for a particular direction, so that it can counter the ways of the dominant political party. Gramsci says that this way of posing the problem has as a result a considerable extension of the concept of intellectual, but it is the only way which enables one to reach a concrete approximation of reality. It also clashes with preconceptions of caste. The function of organizing social hegemony and state domination certainly gives rise to a particular division of labor, and therefore to a whole hierarchy of qualifications in some of which there is no apparent attribution of directive or organizational functions. For example, in the apparatus of social and state direction, there exists a whole series of jobs of manual and instrument character. It is obvious that such a distinction has to be made, just as it is obvious that other distinctions have to be made as well. Indeed, intellectual activity must also be distinguished in terms of its intrinsic characteristics according to levels which in moments of extreme opposition represent a real qualitative difference. Yes. Real qualitative difference. At the highest level would be the creators of various sciences, philosophies, art, etc. At the lowest, the most humble administrators and divulgators of pre-existing traditional accumulated intellectual wealth. So he says that the problem which he begins with over here, he says that there is a difference that always exists between these, মানে যতটাই আর কি ইন্টেলেকচুয়ালস অর্গানিক হয়ে যাক না কেন, যতটাই একটা পলিটিক্যাল পার্টি or any dominant social group, even if we forget about the political party in this case, any dominant social group, however how many ever organic intellectuals they may develop, they may have, how many ever the organic intellectuals may choose to work for any social group, there will always exist a gap between these intellectuals and the people in the group. সেটা কেন? Gramsci states the obvious. He says that it is obvious that such a distinction has to be made. Why? Because in any institution, There any institution, suppose institution of industry, the institution of education, the institution of law, the institution of religion, any which where, any which strata of the sector of the society you pick up and you see and you scrutinize its inner apparatus, you will see that there are functions which are intellectual functions, যেগুলো নিয়ে আমি এতক্ষণ আলোচনা করলাম, and there will be functions that are not linked to any intellectual activity. For example, he says that there are agents, there are manual laborers, they are agents rather than executives. So there are rungs of cycle, hierarchy. যে কোনো একটা অফিস স্ট্রাকচারের কথা ভাবো, যে কোনো সেরকমই একটা সমাজের স্ট্রাকচারও হয়, there are hierarchies, there are levels of work. So there are the organic intellectuals, there are the laborers, there are the industrial workers, there are the cleaners, there are people who handle phone calls, telephone calls, emails, there are people who are peons, who deliver tea, who deliver newspapers. Yet can we include all of these activities within the intellectual activity of a social group? No, we cannot. So Gramsci, of course, here says that it is not possible. Even if there are organic intellectuals, even if a political party has been successful, even if the revolutionary party of Lenin is successful in retaining all of its organic intellectuals, it will never be able to bridge this gap completely, because in that social group of workers there will always be people whose work and whose jobs do not pertain or do not add in any way to the progress of that social group. And this is what the obvious truth that Gramsci states. We will keep it up till here. এখনো অবধি কারোর কোনো সমস্যা, any problem, any question, queries, then please ask me. Up till now কোনো বুঝতে কোথাও প্রবলেম হয়েছে, কিছু আবার রিপিট করলে ভালো হয়, তাহলে প্লিজ এখনই জিজ্ঞেস করো।